In 6 minutes' time, Canon are going to do a big announcement. We're expecting it to be about the R5 and R6, but let's see. Grab yourself a cup of tea and join me as I watch the announcement live. I'm waiting for the announcement to start and the virtual meeting to start. I'm not going to play in the entirety of the broadcast from Canon, just a few selected highlights and my reaction to particular things as they happen. And then at the end, I'm just going to sum up with my initial thoughts about, well, presumably the R5 and R6 as they're announced. So stick with me as we watch the announcement. So here we go. It's 60 seconds according to the timer. First thing I want to comment about is the fact that this isn't actually live. It's a premiere. The video we're about to watch has previously been uploaded to YouTube and is being broadcast as a premiere. So the announcement's already happened. We just haven't seen it yet. Right, so premiere will begin shortly. Right, here we go. So hopefully the volumes are sensible, that you can just about hear what's going on in the background with Canon part and hear me over the top. So here we go. The countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, what? Another countdown? Come on, Canon, how many countdowns do you actually need for this? So we've got some nice video. Kind of difficult to really assess the quality of it on a YouTube video. And I guess the question is, has this video been shot on one of the cameras they're about to announce?
Define what a professional mirrorless can be, but of course...
This is of course what I'm waiting to hear about the R5. All this talk about integration with the cloud is something that I think is a bit of a red herring. Most pros aren't going to do that. Files are just too big to actually send out in the field via the cloud. Right, so what have we got? "20 frames per second sounds impressive, I must admit. 45 megapixels, yeah, happy with that. "120 frames per second 4K, again, very nice. 8K raw video, also very nice, but I doubt I'd use it. Yay, weather sealed, like that. I'm a bit dubious about the 8-stop stabilization, but we'll see. The reactions seem quite genuine about the excitement, and it was interesting to see there was a flip-out screen in there at one point. That is quite impressive, 1 and 2 second handheld exposures. I'd be interested to see how that actually works in practice. It sounds impossible. Right, this will be interesting. This presumably is the R6, so it'll be interesting to see how it compares to the R5 and what the actual differences are between the two different systems. That face detection focusing, I hope that's on the R5 as well. Yeah, face tracking could be quite interesting, particularly for theatre work, combined with the low light capabilities. I wonder whether that is on the R5 as well. I really hope it is. Hand holding the camera for 4 seconds? That just sounds too exaggerated for me. That's interesting with the image stabilization. It's implying that to get that full stabilization, you need both. Still, it's good if it works. That's interesting. Downsampling for 8K to 4K in body. Cloud platforms, I think, are an advertising thing, not a practical thing for photographers. Certainly not if you work on a cruise ship. Right, so now we know where this 8-stop stabilization comes from. It's a particular lens which can do allegedly up to 5 stops combined with the R5 or the R6. So it's not going to be available on every lens and every camera body. That macro function sounds a little bit hyped for me, given the focal length of that lens, and none of these images, they're nice and not that close up. I'd like to see something a little bit closer than that. So I personally think that macro lenses should be 100, 105 millimeter, that sort of level, rather than 85. I've not seen anything that's particularly close up with it. Right, there we go with the macro. Half-size macro, so it isn't true macro, and it's 35 centimeter focal distance. So if you're into macro photography, then that 85 millimeter lens, it's an extra feature, but don't buy it for macro. That's not what it's intended for. They're just trying to add an extra feature on there for marketing. They're showing a frame extracted from an 8K video. I'm sure it is quite impressive, but of course we can't see just what that detail looks like on what is effectively a 1080p video. I think I need a little bit of time just to think through what I've watched and to get my thoughts together. So join me in a few moments as far as you're concerned, but it'll be a little while for me while I just get my head around what we've watched. And the notable thing that wasn't mentioned on here is price. So I'm going to find that out, and I'll talk about the price points, because I think price has to go hand in hand with features. Because if we don't know what the price is, it doesn't matter how good a product is. If I can't afford it, it's no use to me. So I'm going to do the research on that, and I'll be back in a few ticks with some additional information. So see you at that point. And I'm back. What I've done is I've done a little bit of research about the two cameras and all the things which were announced, and I've got the prices off the UK website for WEX, which used to be Warehouse Express, and that's what you can see on the screen behind me. What I want to do is just go through effectively their flyer, because it just happens to be a good way of bringing up images of each of the products and talking about them. So let's start off with this. Yeah, what we know is they have arrived as per the announcement that we've just watched. But let's look down. First of all, let's have a look at this R5 that's just come out. And my initial reaction to it is it's a fantastic camera. I love it. I really, really want it. It ticks all the boxes for me. The high resolution on there. Okay, let's be realistic about this. Most of the time we don't need, 45 megapixels on an image, especially if we're going to be viewing them on screen, as probably 95% of all our images are. They're just viewed on screen these days. But where does that come in? Well, it's really good for things like stock photography, which I don't do as much of these days, but you want high resolution images there. So it's really useful for that because that opens up more sales. If I was doing any advertising work, again, I need that highest resolution. Whilst I don't do much wildlife, because I haven't got the patience for it, when I do, it's nice to be able to crop in and still have a high resolution image. So again, that's ticking all the boxes on there. So I like the idea of 45 megapixels. So what about the other specifications on there? Well, there are two which really excite me. The first one is that true silent running. Now, that's only available when you use the electronic shutter as opposed to the mechanical shutter. It's also worth noting that the mechanical shutter only gives you 12 frames per second. Only gives you 12 frames per second. That's still plenty, whereas the electronic gives 20 frames per second. So the question is, why would you have both? Well, they're both for different uses, to be perfectly honest. The problem with an electronic shutter is you get that distortion effect, the rolling shutter effect, where something like a fast-moving propeller will look bent because of how electronic shutters work. That doesn't happen with a mechanical shutter. So it's horses for courses on that. Depends what you're doing. There are times when an electronic shutter would be fantastic. Examples where I would use the electronic shutter over the mechanical one. Obviously theatres give the silent running, so any dance moves, things like that, then I would be able to capture the performance mid-movement because I got that fast burst mode. Wildlife photography, similarly. Things like fast-moving aircraft, then you don't want that bent shutter, or if it's a helicopter, something like that, you would go to your mechanical shutter and that will eliminate that. So it's great to have that choice. The other feature which excited me, as you can probably tell from the video, was the weather sealing. Now, I am known for doing photography when the weather turns bad. I love creating images in the rain, but there's always that worry about taking a camera out in those conditions. Most of the time I don't worry about it with my gear. It's the 5D Mark III is, I would say, weather resilient. It's not true weather sealed as the R5 is. So that's brilliant as well. There's a couple of things I did notice that were a bit of a disappointment. There's one in particular. The fact that it does 8K video RAW is absolutely fantastic for editing, except for the fact that the files are massive. And how often am I likely to want 8K? Probably not that much. 4K on the other hand, yeah, I'm really interested in 4K. Whether I'll produce any of these videos at 4K, I don't know, but it gives the option to zoom in at 4K. So if instead of having a jump cut, I can just crop in to cover that and keep the flow going with the videos. The problem with 4K is they don't offer RAW format at 4K. And the reason for this is that because it's natively 8K, to actually produce 4K, they actually have to downsample. Now, in some ways that's a good thing, because that downsampling is taking the signal from multiple sensors and combining them down to produce a 4K image from an 8K. And that means you will get a better resolution and better noise reproduction at 4K than you do on other cameras, because it's doing that downsampling. The downside of it is the processor is so busy doing that it can't actually then reconvert it back to RAW after doing it. So you lose RAW, which Could be a bit of a problem for those people who do a lot of video with the camera, who like to shoot with raw video because they can do better color grading on it. I'm not at that level, so it's probably not a big problem for me. But 5 years time, I tend to keep a camera 5.5 years, 6 years. The 5D Mark I think I had for 6-7 years. The Mark III I've had now, goodness knows, probably about a similar sort of length of time with it. So I tend to keep cameras for a long time. So at the end of that, chances are I might be wanting to do that sort of thing at 4K and it doesn't allow it. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. It's something that's not putting me off though. I can live with that, that sort of thing. What's the biggest problem with it? Well, the biggest problem is here on the screen. It's the price. The UK price is £4,199. £4,200. £4,200. That is a lot. And it's especially frustrating because if you were to buy this in the States it's going for $3,899. That translates to, with the current exchange rates, to £3,200. It's £1,000 cheaper in the US than it is here in the UK. And that irks me. That makes me think, oh, that really annoys me that we are being penalised. Now, I did think, right, well, what if I ordered a US version? Well, it's a double whammy then, because in the US you then have to pay sales tax, and notice it's sales tax, not VAT, that you get hit for there. So you have to pay the sales tax, you have to pay to have it shipped over to the UK, which isn't cheap in itself. On arrival into the UK, it gets hit with VAT, and because it's come out of from outside the country, it gets import duty stuck on it as well. So actually, it still costs more to buy it abroad and to ship it over. So yeah, it's a problem. I still want this camera. What it means is I'm not going to get it immediately. I'm going to wait till the price drops, and it will drop. In a year's time, that price will have come down. And by how much, I don't know. In a year's time, maybe there'll be some second hand, I don't know. There may be one or two knocking around, so it might be possible to get them at a lower price. So, year to 18 months, I think this will be the camera that I purchase. I think it's a superb camera. I really love it. I like the idea of it. It's got everything that I want. The dual slots in there. It's just fantastic. The other thing that I really like about it, or other things, the face tracking focusing. That is fantastic. But it's not just face tracking. It's entire body tracking. So if you've got a person there who turns away from the camera, with traditional face tracking, the camera will then start going whoop, 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 as it tries to focus and find a face. But with this, what happens is it realizes the person's turned away and it becomes head tracking. Wonderful. They've also put in animal head tracking or face tracking, and not only that, once the camera has got a lock on a face, it will then try to find within the face the eye and focus on that. I mean, that is cool. That is really cool. I don't know about you, but when I try to do wildlife photography, I have to take thousands of shots just to get one where the eye's in focus on there, because the animals are moving, particularly birds, And that slightest movement from me as well, even with the tracking, it depends what it locks onto. And quite often the area of contrast isn't necessarily the eye. So again, that is really cool. The other things that are brilliant with it is the focus points. The traditional diamond focusing area that we've had on the DSLRs, that's gone. It covers the whole area with your focus points now. So that means if your subject and your focus tracking moves to the top left or bottom right or whatever, it's still going to be okay. With the old traditional triangular arrangement of focus points, you'd lose it because you have to keep it under your focus points. So again, absolutely brilliant. Right, anyway, enough of me sort of gushing over the R5. Let's look down at the next one, which is the R6. Now, the R6 is interesting. It's a cut down or crippled version of the R5, effectively. It will produce 20 megapixel images. Now, here's one thing I'm not sure of with it. It says it's a 20 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor, which I'm sure it is. But I thought I heard somewhere in the presentation that actually it was the same sensor as the R5. Does that mean that what it's doing is it's multi-sampling to produce a 20 megapixel image, and thus giving it the better low light performance? If it is doing it in software, I wonder whether the likes of Magic Lantern further down the line will be able to undo that limitation and bring it back up to 46. It's interesting. I don't know. I suspect it's a hardware thing, but just a thought, just something I'm throwing out there. Most of the other things are the same between the two, except that the R6, because it's got this lower resolution sensor, which, well, in theory, it means the sensors are further apart, which means that there will be less noise, which means it's better under low light conditions. So in theory, this is the better camera for theatre work of the two. However, I still want an R5 because of all the other features on there. So interesting camera. It's a lot more affordable at only $2,499, so 2,500. A lot cheaper. For me, do I want to come down on the sensor size? I probably don't. There are a few other sort of little differences between the two. The R6, the sync speed is your standard 200th of a second, but the R5 is faster, 250th of a second. So effectively, they've just taken out one or two features of the R5 to create the R6. So the question that anyone who's contemplating buying this needs to ask is, are those extra features ones that are worth paying the extra for? For me, as a professional who uses the camera on a regular basis and keeps it for years, it's probably worth paying the extra on it if I can afford it at the time I need to replace. For most people, probably not. I would imagine that probably 90% of the people who come here to my studio to shoot wouldn't need the extra features of the R5 because they're not producing images of that higher specification in what they're doing. There are some people who would use it. So that's the difference between the two. And let's move down and look at some of the other gear that was there. I mean, I'm going past things like trade-up values and kits that you can buy that WEX are offering. But this was the other item that I didn't really comment on during the announcement, but the new printer that's being released. And I notice no price on that, which is a little bit disappointing. The Pro 300 looked very nice on there, and it's certainly something I would consider if I wasn't quite so close to DS Colour Labs. For me, any photo printing, it makes more sense just to send the file to DS Colour Labs and then go and collect from there, because it's 5 minutes drive away and it's on the route from home to the studio, so it's a no-brainer for me. But if anything happened to them and I couldn't use them, then this is something I would seriously consider. I have used the Epson A3 Plus printers over the years, and I've had a lot of trouble with heads clogging, and this allegedly has a lot of technology in it to deal with that. So it's certainly on my radar if I was buying a photo printer. Let's just have a look. I haven't clicked on this before, but let's just have a look at the more information that they offer on here. $699. Actually, that's not a bad price. I do like that price for an A3 photo printer. Of course, the biggest cost with these sort of things is in the inks. And with something like that, I'd have to add up the cost of inks. It takes 10 different coloured inks. So it looks a good printer, and certainly it's now on my radar. Some of the technology that they were talking about looks really good on there. Let's move on down to the next thing on here, which is just to talk about these new lenses. 4 lenses that were announced, and they are an 85mm prime, which they also call the macro lens. Not impressed with that, Canon, sorry. That really isn't a macro lens. That's an extra marketing feature that you've said is, at best, it's half macro, it's 50%, it's not 1:1, that's not true macro with it. It's probably a very, very good portrait lens. And I did like the look of that, but I'm a bit cynical about them calling it a macro lens on there. And looking at the price on it, $649, not bad on that. It's certainly something, if I was in the market for a prime lens for portraiture and I had a mirrorless camera, that would be one I'd be interested in. Again, difficult to tell the true quality of the images and how sharp they are from a video, but it looked like it was a good lens. It looked like it was producing good results. I'd want to see I'd want to see some example images at full resolution on it before I would stump up some money for it. Of the others, the RF 100 to 500, that looks a nice wildlife lens, and especially on this R series, because with all of these lenses, the image stabilization that's in there works with the lens image stabilization works with the in-body stabilization, and that's how we get that 8 stops of stabilization. So again, nice lens if I was a wildlife photographer and I had money to burn, because well, it's not far short of £3,000. I can't justify that because of what I work with and what I do. So it's not something I would buy because I don't do that kind of shooting often enough. But if I was, then yeah, I'd certainly be interested. It looks like a good option, particularly because of that combination of the R body with the image, the in-body stabilization with the lens stabilization. Then looking at the other two. Now these are a couple of curious lenses. They are fixed focal length. They are f11, full stop. No change, it's f11, 600mm or 800mm. bit on the expensive side for that. I'm sure the image quality is good. Not a very flexible lens. I guess if you're a wildlife photographer and you don't mind lugging extra bits of kit around with you, maybe worth looking at. The 800 is interesting, albeit nearly £1,000. An 800mm lens is a very specialist lens in itself. But look what you can do with it. You can combine it with these extenders. So 800mm, 200, a 2x converter, 1600mm lens. That is some magnification. And the autofocus still works with it. This is one of the things they've said, is they have designed these so that you don't lose the autofocus even though you're at a very small aperture on there. So again, quite interesting on that. The two extenders, yeah, saw the prices I would expect on there, and certainly would be potentially on my radar if I had RF lenses. Obviously I haven't got an RF body, let alone any RF lenses, so not on my radar at the moment, but yeah, they serve a purpose. Then we move down to some other accessories. And I'm sorry, Canon, but this one, the wireless transmitter, £1,349 to put wireless capability on a camera. What planet is this coming from? Okay, I know it's pro kit. I know it probably works really well. But come on, my little point and shoot camera has got wireless capability. And if you can get it in a little point and shoot that costs a couple of £100, why can't we have that in our cameras without having to pay out nearly £1,500 for it? That annoys me. That shouldn't be an extra cost like that. That should be part of the camera. That should be part of what's required in there. These days, it's wireless connectivity should be standard now. Now, okay, I'm never going to use that capability to send images up to the cloud. Where would I want to use it? I would want to use that in the studio for tethered shooting without having a cable trailing around. The moment I tether, and it works fine, but I do have a cable. And I'd like to do without that. But doing without a cable isn't worth £1,349. Sorry, Canon, you are not going to get me to buy that bit of kit. Moving down to the next one, or the next two, we've got a battery grip and we've got a battery. Let's look at the battery grip first. £419 for a battery grip. Again, this is I think that's overpriced. I can't see how a Canon branded battery grip they can justify that price. I'm not worried about it because there will be third-party ones. They will come along, and the third-party ones will be £150 maximum. So, unfortunately, Canon, I think you're cutting off your nose to spite your face with this. You're not going to entice me to buy that at that price. I'm not made of money. And then next to it, the battery. Now this is something I need to do some research on, but this looks to be an E6 nickel hydride battery. That's the standard batteries most of us have been using with Canon for years, as far as I can tell, unless the NH means it's a little bit different for it. My apologies for not having done the research. This is all off the top of my head reaction stuff. But really, £114 for a battery? Sorry, I'm going to buy third party. At that price, I'm going to buy third party. Yeah, I know some third party ones are not very good, but for the price of them, you can buy them over and over again for the full price of that. And some third party ones are good. Duracell, I'm very happy with Duracell as a battery provider. And if they have a battery, third party type battery for any kit, I'll go to Duracell. They've got a reputation, they've built their reputation on batteries, so I trust them. And I'm sure they will have batteries that will fit this. So I wouldn't be paying £114 for spare batteries for an R5 at that price. So that's really my initial reaction. Overall, I think the announcement is good. The R5, I want it, can't have it. It's a lovely bit of kit. I'm sure I'll get one eventually. The R6, for most people, I think will do everything you need of a mirrorless full frame camera. So look at that and ask yourself the question, do you really need those extra features on there? The printer, yeah, that looks promising. Want to see some prints from it whenever there is a photo show that we're allowed to go to. I guess that will be September next year, over a year away, the photo show at the NEC. So yeah, want to see the prints on that. But that's on my radar for the sort of time where I'm not able to use DS Color Labs. The lenses, well, nothing in there that particularly leaps out at me. Maybe that 85mm, not because of the macro, but because of the stabilization in that. I could imagine using that with that level of stabilization. I mean, what was the maximum aperture on it? Again, let me remind myself on there. It's an f2 lens. I could really imagine using that for theatre work. And if I've got 8 stops of stabilization with it for theatre, I can shoot at some really low ISO settings on it. So yeah, that's on my radar on there. So yeah, I think it's a good announcement. Really interested in those areas with it, and eventually I'll get hold of them. Now, I want to finish with one final warning about all of this and about a lot of the other so-called reviews and reactions. Remember that those of us who are posting here on YouTube, reacting to these announcements, the vast majority of us have not had our hands on this gear. We haven't tried it out in the field. And those who have may have only had it for a day or so. The true test of this kit is when someone's had it in their hands and they've used it for a month, day in, day out, that they've used it on assignment, they've used it with clients, they've taken it through testing conditions. And I'm sure that the Canon associates that we saw in the videos, in the announcement, have done that kind of thing. It looks like they've had more time with it than most of the reviewers will have had. So take the reviews at this stage with a pinch of salt. Take the reactions, including my own, with a pinch of salt. And wait until people have actually used it and see the results. Get hold of the files out of there and make your own mind up. Anyway, I hope you found this reaction video interesting and helpful. Sorry it's gone on a bit, but I thought it was worth going through everything on there. If you want more videos like this for future announcements, do let me know. In the meantime, keep subscribed to this channel, hit the bell icon so you get future updates. And if you want more videos to help improve your photography, watch one of the videos that's on the screen now, and I'll see you in the next video. And until then, keep making great photos. Bye for now.